This is Debt Free in 30, where every week we take 30 minutes and talk to industry experts about debt, money, and personal finance. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
I can track how many people download the podcast version of each episode of Debt Free in 30, and I can tell you that so far in 2016, the most downloaded episode was episode number 89, titled, Is the Real Estate Bubble About to Burst?, with my guest, Hilliard MacBeth. Mr. MacBeth literally wrote the book on this topic with his book, When the Bubble Bursts, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. Episode 94 with Ben Rabidoux, where we also talked about real estate, was also one of our top downloaded episodes, so that tells me something. It tells me that Canadians are interested in whether or not they should be buying or selling real estate. Unlike Hilliard MacBeth and Ben Rabidoux, I'm not a real estate expert. I have no idea if real estate in Ontario and Vancouver will keep going up or whether it will crash. I'm recording this in July 2016, so if you're listening to this podcast at some point in the future, you may already know the answer to that question. But as of today, I don't. But here's what I do know. You can make a lot of money in real estate, but you can also lose a lot of money. When your house goes up in value, it's great. When it doesn't, well, it isn't. And I know from past history that real estate problems have been an issue for people who ultimately end up having to go bankrupt or file a proposal. Every 2 years, we do our Joe Debtor study, where we take a look at what the profile is of a person who ends up filing a proposal or going bankruptcy. When we last did this study last year, 1 in 4, so about 24% of the people who file a bankruptcy or do a consumer proposal own a home at the time that they file. The average mortgage outstanding at that point in time is just under $200,000. However, these are not average mortgages. The average insolvent homeowner had a mortgage ratio of about 90%. In other words, 90% of the net realizable value of their home was encumbered by debt. The typical homeowner was around 46 years old. They had an average net monthly income of just under $3,000, but they also had total unsecured debt of over $68,000. So think about that. They've got a mortgage of around $200,000, but they've also got other debt, credit cards, bank loans, and so on, of over $68,000. And when you break it down, in fact, personal loans were about $26,000, credit cards were almost $30,000. They also owed something for taxes, student loans, and some other debts. So why is that? Well, one of the reasons is when you buy a house, you need to furnish it. You need to do some landscaping. You need to do some repairs. Got to put a new roof on it. Got to paint it. Got to do this. Got to do that. All of those things cost money. And that's one of the things people miss when they're buying a house. They look at the numbers and they go, okay, well, the mortgage payment's going to be this much a month. I can afford that. And they forget about all of the other things. So what I'd like to do today is give you my thoughts on real estate. And I want to give you how I think about this decision. Should I buy a house or not? Should I sell my house or not? I've been talking to a lot of people this year who own houses that have gone up in value, but they also have a bunch of other debt, just like I talked about with our typical client. And so they come to me and they say, hey, what should I do? Well, it's a difficult decision. On the one hand, if you sell your house, you can cash in, get some money, and use that money to pay off your credit cards and bank loans. But then, of course, you don't have a place to live. You've now either got to buy a smaller place or you've got to rent. Does that make sense? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. I also talked to other people who perhaps have gone through a bankruptcy or proposal. They're finished. Their credit's starting to look good. They've done some things to repair their credit. And now they're deciding, should I buy a house or should I continue to rent? Well, we're going to talk about the thought process behind that decision today as well. Obviously, the answer depends on what the real estate market is going to do in the future. In places like Vancouver and Toronto, it's been going up literally for years and years and years. If it continues to do that, then yeah, I guess buying is a good idea. Interest rates are pretty low right now. If they stay low, again, buying is a good idea. But If interest rates go up, or if the economy slows down and as a result real estate prices go down, not so good an idea. So how do you actually think through that decision? Let me give you an example, and here's how I would do it. I'm going to pick a mythical property, and I'm going to assume that that property sells for $500,000. Now, this could be a good-sized house in a place outside of Toronto, or it could be a relatively small condo in Toronto. Let's assume that you've got $100,000 saved up as a down payment. Now, I understand a lot of people aren't going to have that, but to keep the math simple, let's assume that. Let's assume that you can go out and qualify for a mortgage, 5-year fixed rate of 4%. If you've got really good credit, you can actually get a mortgage interest lower than that right now. But let's, again, to keep the math simple, assume you're going to buy a $500,000 condo downtown in Toronto. You're going to have a $100,000 down payment. You're going to end up with a mortgage for 5 years locked in at 4%. So if you amortize the mortgage over 25 years, so the rate is guaranteed for the first 5, but you're going to be paying it off over 25 years, your monthly mortgage payment would be $2,104.08. So let's assume you're going to live in this place for 5 years. You've got a 5-year mortgage locked in. You're going to live in it for 5 years. Well, after 5 years, if you pay $2,104.08 every month for 60 months, after 5 years, you'll have paid just over $126,000 in mortgage payments. The balance of your mortgage at the end of 5 years, obviously your mortgage started out at $400,000 because you had a $100,000 down payment. At the end of 5 years, your mortgage balance will be just over $348,000, so you will have paid down just under $52,000. The difference, of course, is the $74,000 you paid in interest. Now, let's assume that the maintenance fees are $500 a month on this condo that you've bought. If you are buying a house, well, there aren't maintenance fees, but obviously you've still got property taxes and things like that. So again, I'm using round numbers just to keep it simple. If you own a place, there's also repairs and maintenance. If the fridge or the stove or some light fixture or something goes wrong, you've got to replace it. You've got to clean the carpets. You might have to repaint. So let's throw in another $400 a month for repairs and maintenance. And I realize some months you don't have to pay anything. Other months you're going to pay more than that. But let's assume over the course of the 5 years, it averages out to around $400 a month. So to own the condo or the house, you're going to need a $100,000 down payment, and you're going to pay mortgage payments of $2,100 a month, maintenance fees and property taxes of $500 a month, and repairs and maintenance, let's say $400 a month. So roughly that is about $3,000 a month to own this $500,000 condo. So what would it have cost to rent this exact same place? Well, I went on the internet and did some searching around, and you can probably rent the exact same place for about $2,400 a month. And in fact, I had a meeting with a property manager back in June, and that person told me that, yeah, the average investor she works with who owns a condo and she then rents it out for them is cash flow negative somewhere between $300 and $600 a month. In other words, the investor takes the money from the renter to pay the mortgage and condo fees and everything else, but it's not enough to cover all the costs. So each month, the investor who owns the condo and is renting it out has to kick in somewhere between $300 and $600 a month. Well, that's what my numbers are showing as well. So let's do a comparison here. Let's assume that I've got $100,000 for the down payment, and I'm either going to buy the $500,000 condo or I'm going to rent that exact same condo. So option number one, I'm going to rent it. So let's assume I take my $100,000 down payment and I invest it, because obviously I don't need it, I'm not buying a place. And let's assume I can earn 1% a year on it after tax. So maybe I'm earning 1% in my TFSA, so there's no tax on it, or maybe I'm earning more than 1%, but I pay the tax on it. So I can rent and pay $2,400 a month in my example. So after 5 years, I'll have paid, well, $144,000 in rent, and I will still have my original $100,000 investment. So with the interest at 1% a year, it'll have grown to about, well, just over $105,000 after 5 years. Now, of course, if I can earn more than 100% or earn more than 1%, I'll have more. If I can earn, let's say, 5% a year, then at the end of 5 years, I'll have $127,000. But let's keep it simple. Let's assume I only earn 1%. So I paid $144,000 in rent. I have $105,000 now in savings at the end of 5 years. So my net cash reduction over those 5 years was, well, $38,889 to be exact, but let's assume it's roughly $40,000. And that makes sense because I actually had a place to live for 5 years. So it makes sense that it would have cost me something. Now let's look at the second option, buying. So let's assume I can buy the condo for $500,000 and I'll use my $100,000 in savings for the down payment. So I go out, I get my mortgage, and as we went through all the numbers, I'm going to pay over 5 years, let's say about $3,000 a month, which is about $180,000 over 5 years. So my net cash drain is $180,000 as compared to only $40,000 for renting. But of course, that's not a valid comparison because I still own this condo I just bought. I own a condo that now has a mortgage on it after 5 years that has been paid down to just over $348,000. So let's assume I could sell it for exactly what I paid for it, $500,000. I'd have to pay real estate commissions of, let's say, 5%, and I'd probably have $1,000 in legal fees to sell it. And let's assume that there are no penalties to break the mortgage because I locked in for 5 years and now it's maturing and now I'm selling. So I sell for $500,000, pay the $25,000 in real estate commissions, pay the $1,000 in legal fees, and I pay off the mortgage of $348,000. So I'm left with about $125,784. So I paid out $180,000, $3,000 a month, while I lived in the condo for 5 years. Obviously, that included my condo fees and repairs and maintenance and everything. But I recover about $126,000 when I sell, so my net cost for 5 years was about $54,000. So to compare, renting cost me $40,000 for 5 years. Owning cost me $54,000 over 5 years. In this example, renting was better from a numbers point of view. Of course, I can change the assumptions and get a different answer. If the home went up in value over 5 years, so instead of being worth $500,000 at the end of 5 years, let's assume it was worth $600,000. Well, in that case, when I sold it, my real estate commissions would have been a little bit higher, but I would have netted about $221,000. So my cash costs for those 5 years were actually a positive $41,000. In other words, I owned a condo for 5 years, and even with all I paid in costs, I'm still $41,000 ahead. That's better than being $40,000 in the hole over 5 years. You can see from this example that the break-even point will be somewhere around a 10% increase in the price of the house, or a sales price of about $557,000. So from a math point of view, here's the question you've got to ask yourself. If you plan to own the condo for 5 years, what are the chances that in 5 years you can sell the condo for more than $557,000? If the chances are good, then owning may make sense financially. In my example, you can sell the condo for about $515,000 in 5 years. That would be about the same as renting. So your cash would go down by about $40,000 over those 5 years, which is about what you would have lost over 5 years by renting. So just so we're clear on that, if you sell the condo for $515,000 at the end of 5 years, that's almost exactly the same as renting. Now again, if you change the assumptions, the math will change. If you assume that you could earn 5% per year on your investments, you could rent and invest the $100,000 in cash in investments instead of using it for a down payment. So at the end of 5 years, your investment's going to be worth over $127,000. So I paid $144,000 in rent. I have $127,000 in savings at the end of 5 years. So my net cash reduction over 5 years was just over $16,000. So to compare that to buying, how much would you have to sell your house for in 5 years to be only down $16,000? Well, the answer is about $540,000. So you see how changing some simple assumptions makes a big difference? If you can earn 5% on your down payment money by renting, you earn that money, and renting starts to look a lot better than buying. So as you can see, there are many factors to consider. How much can you earn on your down payment? What's the interest rate on your mortgage? What will you pay in condo fees, property taxes, and repairs and maintenance? If you buy a brand new condo, it's possible that repairs and maintenance will be very low because none of the appliances will need replacing in the next few years. If you buy a used condo or house, it's highly likely that you'll be replacing a lot of stuff in the next 5 years. Now, of course, in my example, I just assumed that you had a $100,000 down payment. Well, there's not a lot of people who are walking around with $100,000 in their pocket. If you only had a $50,000 down payment or a smaller number, then the interest rate on your mortgage is going to be higher. If you have less than a 20% down payment, you need mortgage insurance, which usually you get through CMHC. Your lender arranges all of this. But what it means is your monthly mortgage payment is higher than the number I was using in my example. So if you don't have the big down payment, then the mortgage is going to cost more, and the math obviously is quite a bit different. Now, of course, there's a bunch of things other than just math you have to consider when you're going through this thought process of should I buy or should I rent? Should I sell my house and rent? What should I do? Some of the non-math considerations, the non-financial considerations, are things like security. If you are renting a condo and the landlord decides to sell it, well, at some point, you've got to move out. If you've got a 1-year lease, at the end of that 1-year lease, he can kick you out if he wants to sell it. If you own your own place, you're in complete control. You can stay there as long as you want. What about things like painting the walls? Well, your lease might say, nope, the landlord takes care of all that. But if you really want to have your office painted in red or your bedroom painted in green, well, if you own the house, you can do whatever you want. If you're renting, you don't have that flexibility. What about things like pets? Well, if you own your own house, you can have as many pets as you want. Nobody can say anything. But if you are a tenant, there may be rules either in your building or that your landlord has imposed saying that you can't have certain pets. What about flexibility? If you own your house and you decide to move, let's say you find a better job opportunity in some other city, some other province, and you want to move, you've got to sell your house. That obviously takes time. You've got to have a real estate agent involved. You got to have people coming through your house to look at it. You end up paying real estate commissions and so on. If you are renting your house, then you are a lot more flexible. You can say, okay, I'm done. I'm out of here. At the end of my lease, here you go, landlord. And if you've been there for a year, you're probably on a month-to-month lease anyways. So it's real simple. You give your landlord 60 days notice or whatever is required under your lease, and you're gone. No costs, no hassle. So renting gives you, in a lot of cases, a lot more flexibility than if you own. What this all comes down to is your view of the future. What does the future hold? And unfortunately, that's an impossible question to answer. So my advice is to sit down and crunch the numbers under different scenarios. And it's pretty easy to do with a simple spreadsheet. You can do it with a pen and a calculator. Ask yourself some questions. The first question would be, okay, what do I think my house will be worth in 5 years? What will it be worth in 2 years? What will it be worth when I decide to sell it? What do I think interest rates are going to be? Interest rates right now are about as low as they've ever been. Are they going to keep going down or are they going to go up? What happens if I have to renew my mortgage at a higher interest rate in the future? You want to play with all these different scenarios, and that helps make it a lot clearer. I think at the very least, I'd be talking to my friends who own a condo or who own a house of the kind that I'm thinking of buying and ask them, what does it cost them to live in their place? because we've ignored all the other things like hydro and gas and all the other utilities and other costs. You want to have a pretty good idea of what you're getting yourself into, because I've met with a lot of people who said, hey, I had no idea it was going to cost that much to own my house. I knew I could cover the mortgage, but I didn't realize about all these other things. I think the final thing about the future to consider is, what are your job prospects? Are you in a very secure job that you'll have for the next 20 years with no problems? Or are you in a job where there's the chance you might get laid off? Again, important things to consider. I've got some more thoughts on this as to how to make these decisions, and I'm going to talk about that in the Let's Get Started segment. But first, we're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Debt Free in 30. I'll be right back.
You're listening to Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Welcome back. It's time for the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. On today's show, I talked about real estate and more specifically how you can make the decision about whether you should buy or whether you should rent, whether you are a new home buyer or whether you're considering selling your property that you have now, cashing in, using the money to pay off debt, and going to rent. That's the 30-second recap of what we discussed today. I think there's one other key point that we didn't address, and that's what's called FOMO. FOMO, the fear of missing out. A lot of people are buying real estate today because they're afraid if they don't buy today, prices are going to go up and they're going to miss out. If I don't buy today, by next year, prices will be so much higher, I'll never be able to own a house. As I said in the first segment and in the second segment, prices do not go up forever. So if you can't afford to own a home today, if you don't have a significant down payment, or if you're worried that prices may go down in the future, don't worry about missing out. There's nothing wrong with renting. Save your money, take whatever down payment money you've got saved up, invest that, and be quite confident that renting is not a horrible idea. You are saving your money, you're eliminating risk. If the house prices do go up, oh well, you've still got a place to rent, no big deal. But if house prices do go down because interest rates go up or because the economy gets weaker, you'll be in a much better position to buy in the future. That's the safe alternative. That's our show for today. Thanks for listening. For information on everything we've talked about, you can go to hoyes.com for full show notes. That's HOYES.com. Thanks for listening. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.
Thanks for listening. That was Debt Free in 30.